We're going to be in Matthew chapter 8, and we're going to try to finish up chapter 8 this morning. So we got through the first, 7 chapters last week. And now we're going to try to finish up Matthew 8, and Lord willing, we'll be on Matthew chapter 9 next week. So don't forget to get your green sheet and a bulletin. It's got all the prayer requests and events going on. Don't forget tonight is Praise in the Park. And it starts at 5 o'clock, I'm pretty sure, 5 o'clock. And so there will not be services here at the building. It's all going to be over at the Prairie Grove Battlefield Park. So, with that said, let's just get right into the lesson, Matthew chapter 8, and we're in verse 23. So Jesus got in the boat, and his disciples followed him, and all of a sudden a great storm blew up on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. Jesus, however, was asleep. So they came and woke, "Help, Master," they shouted. "We're done for." "Why are you so scared, you little faith lot?" He replied. I enjoyed that translation. "You little faith lot," he replied. Then he got up, told the wind and sea to behave themselves, and there was a great calm, and the people were astonished. "What sort of man is this," they said, "that the winds and sea do what he says?" As we continue on in Matthew, there's a ebb and flow of what's going on with Jesus in the beginning of his ministry here. And there's always something in the background that we may or may not have an understanding of. So we all know what a rough sea is. We know people that have, I for one get seasick, like horrible. It's the worst sick you've ever been. And the worst time was when I was a child, and we went on I grew up in San Diego, so when we went on a field trip, man, we took a field trip. We got on a big jet airplane and flew to L.A. to the airport, took a tour of the airport. And we rode an Amtrak train. We rode on a Coast Guard helicopter, and those are the kind of things we did when we had a field trip. But the one time we went on a whale hunt, which is whale watching extravaganza, and oh mercy. Let me tell you, I will never go on a whale hunt again. I'm sorry? I fed everything in the ocean that day. Not nothing they'd want to eat, but it was just, I'm sweating right now just thinking about it. Let me tell you, that's how bad it was, and I was probably 9, 10 years old. So there's some things that stick with you, and that was one of those things. And so, a rough sea is something that, these guys that are on the boat with Jesus, a lot of their professions was fishermen. They've been in the water before. They've been in rough water before. I don't know, according to the scriptures, if they were scared, it had to have been pretty treacherous. A pretty treacherous thing. And so, something they had experienced, but not to this degree. So, just keep that in mind, because, the Jewish people were not necessarily a seafaring people. Okay? They were more adapted to the land and the promised land that God had given them. And so, obviously, there was a lot of the guys that were with Jesus here had made their living in the sea, but they weren't by and large a seafaring people. So, if historically in Jewish writings, the sea was a place of power and darkness and evil and threatening and wild and you can conjure visions of sea monsters and just whatever's going on. On a calm day, it wouldn't have been considered a good place. On a day like this, it would have been considered death. They just know, and you can tell by the fear that they had that they thought death was coming. So we see a picture of Jesus calming that death scenario. Okay? He's overcoming this death scenario. So when a little more background on why, just for just a second. In Jewish culture and history, God made the ground, the land, out of the sea. Okay, so God overcame the evil of the sea, and this is in Jewish culture. Overcame the evil of the sea by the land, or with the land. Okay, and so God won victory over the evil of the sea with the land, and so that's a picture that that they would have in their minds. And so the stories of the sea in the scriptures are not many. We do have one that stands out in particular, and they would have understood it too, was Jonah. Okay? And we remember Jonah was a prophet, and God told him to do something. We never find that Jonah said no. He just ran. He just this way. He went the opposite way of where he was supposed to go, and didn't work out well for him. We have another scenario where there's a huge storm on the sea, the rough seas. We have another situation where seasoned seafaring, sailors are terrified. And we have a scenario where Jonah knows it's his fault. Jonah knows that situation is caused by his disobedience to God and his lack of faith in what God would have him to do, and his, it's his, he turns from God's authority. We've talked a lot about authority in Scriptures, and Sister Johnny brought up last week, not in class but after class, that authority can be bad, okay? And we're going to talk about that a little bit, but when I'm speaking of authority in the context of the Scriptures here, we're talking about Christ revealing and proving and demonstrating his authority, okay? And so that's the ultimate authority, and it comes from God. So as Jonah, they throw Jonah into the sea, and the sea calms down, and the fish swallows Jonah and spits him out on the beach, and he has been convinced to do what God told him to do in the beginning. So, these guys in this time would have known that story. They'd have known the history behind that story. And so, a lot of times in the New Testament, Jonah and Jesus have a comparable line of, Jonah being a prophet, Christ being a prophet, 3 days. But we find here that unlike Jonah, and unlike Jonah refusing to do what he was told to do, we have Christ in his authority And the disciples wake him up. He doesn't have to call on God. They don't have to throw him overboard. Those sorts of things. He just calms the sea. And so that sign of his absolute authority. He just rebukes the wind and waves, and they quiet down. Right there. It's just it sounds simple. And when I picture that scenario in my mind, it looks simple. Just because that's the story I've always heard. That's the way I've always seen it. And it was just like immediate and miraculous. And so these guys see that too. So although the comparison of the lifeline with Jonah and him being a prophet, he's obviously considerably greater than Jonah. But just as Jonah's adventure was told as a sign that Israel's God did intend to care for everybody, because we remember Jonah was going to Nineveh, which was a pagan place. And so it's not just Israel that God is saving from judgment. Okay? It's not just Israel that the focus is on. God sent Jesus to save the world. And so it's just another glance into what's going on. So with what they see Jesus has done, which they've seen a lot of stuff, so up until this point, it comes more to home because it's part of what they live every day, and they have an understanding of the sea. They may or may not have an understanding of some of the healings that Jesus has done, but they have an understanding of the sea and the power and authority that Jesus had over the sea is a miraculous thing to them. It's in their wheelhouse of understanding of what's going on. And so the proper reaction to that scenario is more faith in Christ, more faith in Jesus. And so now it's not like we talked about last week, not a general religious response. Because a general religious faith response to something like that miracle that happened would be awe or terror or frightened prayers and supplications to the sea god or whatever. And so this faith is just quite simply a trust in Jesus, that he is the sovereign one. He has authority over the elements. And that focused faith is not something that the disciples had at this time. We can see Christ bringing that faith in. We can see Christ drawing his disciples in. And he draws us in. But we can see that happening. And so now we see what Matthew's doing. And it's funny when you stand back and you look at all the stuff that's going on, and you kind of see Matthew guiding you into what's about to take place. He's telling us bit by bit that other people have a focused faith on Christ, like the leper we talked about last week, like the centurion had a focused faith. But we see that Christ's followers, his disciples, they're just not there yet. Okay? They've seen a lot, and it just keeps crescendoing into what's going on. But it's almost like they're not convinced yet. They're just not convinced. They haven't gone over the cliff yet as far as their faith in Christ. They have some faith about Christ. They have some faith in his abilities to do some things, but it's not just a focused faith. And so they are asking questions, though. Okay, so we know they're starting to learn. We can see through Matthew where that focus is being brought, because they're starting to ask questions. What does it mean? What sort of man is this? They obviously regard him as a leader and a master, and they know he's a healer and a teacher. But this goes way beyond anything they were expecting. Somehow, his authority stretches not only to diseases and things like that. They've seen healers before, I'm sure, and had doctors and this kind of thing, but nothing like what that's going on here. But the natural elements, Christ having authority over the natural elements. Like I said, this is more in their wheelhouse. This is more in their understanding of what's going on. Is just pushing them to just a greater understanding of who it is they're called master, who it is that they're following, who and why they're part of this group, part of this group of men that have made this commitment to follow this man. And so as they come to a fuller understanding, so he wants, as we look through Matthew, he wants us to ask questions also. Okay? And we do. Ask two questions of ourselves. First, how do we personally regard Jesus? Okay? How do we feel about Jesus? How do we think about Jesus? And how do we react to Jesus? Okay? And that's all what questions are. And so when we ask ourselves that question, and we ponder on that question, and we go back through Matthew, and we see the growth of the disciples based on Christ's miracles and him, the evidence of his authority. And as their faith grows, they ask themselves that question, and we have to too. How do we regard Jesus? Okay. Second, are we acting in such a way in our confrontation with the world, the evil of the world? Are we reacting with fear? Are we reacting with misunderstanding? Are we reacting with just a lackadaisical attitude towards his kingdom? Or are we acting in such a way and behaving in such a way and presenting the gospel in such a way that people are asking, what sort of people are we? Okay? What sort of people are we? And so those are the questions that we have to ask. And so as we move into chapter 8, verses 28 through 34, we're going to ask some more questions. And so what sort of people are we? And what sort of people can we be? Okay? And so as we move on to the second half, of chapter 8, second half of chapter 8. So, Mike makes me self-conscious about taking my glasses off. He said something the other day about, it's distracting when somebody in the pulpit takes their glasses off. So every time I reach for my glasses, I think of Mike, and then I just push them back up so I can see under them. And so, so he went across to the other side, to the region of the Gadarenes. 2 demon-possessed men met him coming out of the tombs. They were violent, made it impossible for anyone to go along that road. What is it with us and you, they yelled, you son of God? Have you come here to torture us ahead of the time? Some way off from where they were there, a large herd of pigs was feeding. If you cast us out, the demons begged Jesus, send us into the herd of pigs. Off you go, then, Jesus said. So the demons went out of the men and into the pigs. Then and there, the entire herd rushed down the steep slope into the lake and were drowned with the water. And the herdsmen took to their heels. They went off to the town and told the whole tale, including a bit about the demon-possessed men. And so the whole town came out to see Jesus for themselves. When they saw him, they begged him to leave their district. Completely different reaction than we've been seeing from the previous places Jesus has set foot. Okay? Go away. Please, go away. Now, they would have had to understand his authority over the demons. They would have had to understand some part of the story where the demons knew who Jesus was, and yet they were unwilling to even begin to understand his authority or have faith in this man. They were directed by fear. They were directed or influenced by and I read a lot about the pig thing. I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. But they were influenced by the loss that they incurred. Okay, this herd of pigs, I don't know, was a loss. Okay, and there's a lot of debate about the pigs and what was going on in that scenario. And so the first thing is that if it was Jewish herdsmen and the pigs, that was against the law of Moses. You know, they wanted to have nothing to do with swine. And so they were in opposition to God with that job. I mean, if that's the job they took, they were not supposed to have swine. And so Jesus showed his authority and got rid of that. Okay? And another comment I read was, if it was non-Jewish, the herdsmen were a non-Jewish people, that was still a temptation for the Jewish people in the area. And so, because they were not having anything to do. And so, whichever way you see it, I think we're missing, the people that are focused on the pigs, I think they're missing the point that Jesus had the authority over whatever it was that possessed these men. They recognized who he was based on what they said, and he granted them the possession of the pigs, which they had to go somewhere. So it was either the pigs or some other people, and so he saved people from that. That terror and that possession, that demonic possession, and a lot of debate over what that even meant. The demonic possession even meant, whether it was just a psychosis or it doesn't really matter what it was. It was recognized that Christ was and had authority over the demonic world, such as it was in this point. So, as we go back, we're working toward, I don't know how many people in here are music people. I'm not a music person, but I know what a crescendo is. Okay? I know it starts over time. Okay? The only thing that I could think of, the author talks about going to an opera. Not familiar. Not interested. Never been. Don't care. But I have been to the movies. Okay? And we see this a lot in the movies. And I'm sure that everyone, I would have to say, everyone in this room, if I was to start this, I'm going to call it music, not necessarily music, but if I was to start this, everyone in here knows what I'm talking about. And it starts like this. Jaws, right? And then the shark eats somebody, whatever. But everybody knows what that is. Everybody knows what that feels like. And this is what's happening in Matthew, whether we realize it while we're reading it or not. This is what's happening in Matthew. So, didn't want anybody to rock the boat. You know, you think we would be like that? You know, it's you know, I have a compassion on these people, you know, because up until this point, the ones that were following Jesus and watching everything that was happening, they started to get an idea, okay? They have an idea that he healed the leper. You know, they have an idea that he healed the centurion's servant or son or whoever it is. They have some grasp, regardless of what where they were in their life. They have some grasp. But Jesus just shows up. And, you know, the first reaction would have to be fear. It would have to be fear. You got a guy that just jumps off a boat, shoos the demons, you know, because they know these people that's in the, you know, they know of these people. That's the thing about this whole story that they do know. They don't know Jesus. They don't know his history. They don't know where he came from or what he's doing. But they do know these guys in the tombs. And so him having control over that would have to be a huge fear. Because even though it looks like to us a healing, it looks like a healing, the question would be, what's he going to do to us? What can he do to us? What have we done that will make him angry enough to punish us for whatever it is we've done? And so, you know, I have to think that it was probably a fear. And, you know, complacency, obviously. You know, we get complacent in our lives and we don't want anything rocking the boat. And so, yes, I think so. Short answer, yes. Go ahead. Oh, absolutely. With the silversmiths and all that kind of thing. Right. And we don't know, you know, I don't know the history of the Gadarenes or Gadarenes or whoever they were. You know, that may have been their local livelihood. Like you said, everybody may have been involved in the swine trade, we'll call it. You know, everybody may have been involved in that. We don't know, but yes, that obviously could have been a huge deal. You know, but right, yeah, right, yes, and so yes, loss of their livelihood, fear, being fine with the way things are, you know, sticking with the status quo and not wanting to change. All of those things could obviously be the case. And so, as we watch how Matthew has taken us from the beginning to this massive climax of just mood and emotion and things that are going on, we remember that the chapter began with a little story of a leper. Just one man, quick healing, important in its own way, but not really dramatic as far as stories go. And then the centurion and his servant. And Jesus healing again, but this was at a distance in response to a remarkable faith and with striking consequences. Because this is the beginning of the prophecy of Gentiles, or beginning of the answer to the prophecy, or the prophecy coming through, true, as the Gentiles flock to God's kingdom. And then we got stories of healing and deepening the mood and pointing out the cost to Jesus himself as he went his lonely way to the cross. And then strong music swells and rises again, and Jesus is stilling the storm on the lake. And now, just when we thought it couldn't get any stronger, we have the power over the demonic world. And so, it just gets more dramatic as we go through Matthew and things that are going on with Christ. And so, as we turn all that scenario into a human experience with the wind and the waves inside of us, and not a bad image for how some poor people who find that for whatever reason, their imagination and emotions and thinking and acting seem to have been taken over by forces beyond their control. And so a lot of times we find ourselves in that condition. You know, we find ourselves wondering, where is God? You know, in this turmoil that we have. And you know, we struggle with you know, as far as the demonic men, or demonic possessed men, what that really means. You know, we struggle in our world today with why we have the wide array of, and we're just going to call it mental illness, from schizophrenia to whatever. And you know, that's the world we live in to help explain, you know, what was going on with these men. But the point of the story, of all of the stories, is that Jesus has the authority to teach people. As he's doing on the Sermon on the Mount, he has authority over diseases, both close at hand and at distance. He has authority over the lives of the people who want to follow him, and over the wind and the waves on the lake, and over the shadowy forces of evil in the demonic men, however you want to describe it or think about it. That's what we need to know as we ourselves have decided and made that commitment to follow Christ. Those are the things that we need to know. Those are the things that describe and define the Christ that we follow. Okay? And so those are the things that we can set our faith on. And so he isn't just somebody with good ideas. He isn't just somebody who will tell us how to establish a better relationship with God, which he is those things. But he is somebody with authority over everything. Everything that the physical world on one hand and the non-physical world on the other hand has to throw at us. He has authority over everything. This is a Jesus that we put our trust in. This is a Jesus that we put everything, every aspect of our life at his feet. This is the Jesus that we put our faith in him as the Son of God, in him as the Messiah, in him as our Savior. That's who we put our faith in. So the questions that were asked after Jesus quieted the storm, who is this? What sort of man can this be Now we get the answer. What sort of man can this be? Jesus, the two demon-possessed men yell out, is the Son of God. Okay. There we have our answer. What sort of man is this? Who is this? Where does this authority come from? Where does this power come from? The ability come from? They yell out, the Son of God. This phrase or this nomenclature used later by the disciples, by Peter, by the chief priests, by the centurions at the foot of the cross. It's ironic, the first people to address Jesus in this way do so under an evil influence, demon possession. But Matthew has no doubt that though the demons are evil and destructive, they have access to an insight. They have inside information onto who Jesus really is, to what Jesus really is, Son of God. Another aspect of the story we talked about, everywhere Jesus went, people asked him to stay. Okay? There was so much good going on. There was so much, with the healing and all the things. It was like a gift that these communities were receiving. You know, the healing of the sick is a gift that these communities were receiving. The families of those that were sick were receiving this gift. Their children, their loved ones, their relatives were being given back to them whole. And so it was a gift to the communities. And the more he cured, the more people they brought for him to cure. You know, it was just a snowball effect. And so they wanted him there. They wanted him to stay there. They wanted him to be there. Is that selfish? Probably. I can imagine that if Christ walked in here and started healing the members of this congregation from all of their, we wouldn't want him to leave. What we would want is to bring more people for him to heal and to be more. We'd want to be healed ourselves. And so that's why when we talked about it a little bit earlier, it's kind of curious that the people of Judea regarded him with fear and begged him to leave. Was it because the Jewish Messiah was coming to them and they didn't really know what was going on? And we talked a little bit about that. Was it because they were frightened that he might, since he sent the pigs to the water to their death, maybe he would have some effect on the other livestock? Because, like I said, they don't really have an understanding of what's going on. All they know is, he pushed 2,000 pigs into the water, and we've got other livestock that's going to do the same thing with them. And we don't want that. So let's get him out. So what we do know is that wherever Jesus went, people were in awe of him. There was no sense, in as much as the world today, that he was just one teacher among others, that he was one religious leader to be coolly appraised. They stand back looking, watching, kind of appraising the situation, seeing what this guy's all about. He was more than that. He was a force to be reckoned with. I like that statement. We read in the scriptures of Christ's humility. Okay, we read of his. I don't know. He's not timid or shy or but he wasn't, I don't find him being boisterous or loud or charismatic or any of those things that will draw attention to you, to people, those things that draw attention to people. People were drawn to him because of his humble demeanor. He obviously, the scripture tells us he didn't look like much. He wasn't taller than everybody else, more handsome than everybody else. He wasn't, there wasn't a glow around him or anything like that. He was just a guy in appearance. We know he was so much more than that, and they started to learn that he was so much more than that. And we watched how it built to show that he was so much more than that. And as as the audience was broadening, looking from different perspectives, they could see his authority was broadened. They started to gather an understanding of who this man is, and the demons, proclaimed it, Son of God. Right. That's some more of that insight that we were talking about earlier. As they asked that question, we can understand that they knew that he was the authority of that also. He was the authority of eternity. And so he was the authority of the last days. He was the authority of, over hell and Hades and all the bad stuff that we can conjure in our minds. And they also knew there was a time, but they didn't know the when time. And so, we can see that from the demons also. So, he was a force to be reckoned with, so you might follow him. You might be scared stiff of him. But you could not ignore him. Okay? That's the Jesus we follow today. And that's the Jesus we must make known to the world today. Okay? We need, as the church, as his representatives, we need to be a force to be reckoned with. So, and we finished the whole thing. Oh my goodness.